Joining us here on the line, and the name of the post on Japers Rink is called Regular Season Domination and Complacency. Happy to have joining us here on the show for the first time, Adam Stringham from Japers Rink. Hey, Adam, how are you?
I'm doing pretty well, John. Thanks for having me on.
Read this in coming up here on the plane today, and what I really liked about it, especially in the lead here, was mentioning and Barry Trotz reaching out to some resources because it's a pretty rare group that you're trying to get opinions on and get input on. There's not too many coaches that have been in the position that Barry Trotz has been in, and for all the years that he was in Nashville, the Predators were scratching and clawing to get in, even in good years where they were looking for positioning. This is a first for Barry. In talking with Joel Quenneville and talking with Mike Babcock to kind of get that input on how a dominant team fights through some of that complacency. What was the takeaway from that?
Well, it was really interesting because it looks like Trotz's biggest takeaway from it was that really comes down to the players, and the players have to really drive themselves. There's only so much a coach can do. We saw this before when Trotz said something similar about first-period struggles in this team, and he really rolled with it now by going to two of the greatest coaches in the game, and it's hard to find anyone more respected than Mike Babcock and Joel Quenneville, the highest-paid coach and one of the winningest coaches in NHL history. So it's really going to be up to the players, and I think we've started to see them around the corner now.
In the round-the-corner department, let's talk last night against Columbus and making the most of opportunities, maybe getting some second opportunities that they weren't getting as many of in the St. Louis game, but felt like maybe they were starting to make a little bit of progress there, a little more last night against a scrappy team with a lot of offensive weapons. This was not a depleted call-up-everybody from the AHL like a Maple Leafs type situation. Columbus still has a lot of weapons. How does that look last night against Columbus versus what maybe we've seen say maybe 2 weeks ago?
Last night, there seemed to be a lot more competitiveness, especially in the third period. We saw the Caps come out hard in the third, really throughout the lineup. We just saw a lot of going to the dirty areas and, a lot of this cliche stuff. But that's really the type of things that you want to see in a team getting ready to win. You want to see better puck possession, more second opportunities, as you're saying. And that's really what we saw. The Capitals took real advantage of the game in the third period and made it very clear to the Blue Jackets that the Caps are the most dominant team in the NHL. And when you compare that to a few weeks ago, the Capitals, it's not really fair to say they were coasting by, but it was clear that they were doing, they were just much higher up in the standings than everybody else. And, without getting too dirty in the details, we were starting to see a slip in the, outscoring their opponents. They weren't doing it like they were earlier in the season. And same thing with the possession, but it really has been it's important that the Caps start to round that out. And even though they lost against St. Louis rather handedly, they started that game strong. So the hope is that all these little things are starting to come together as we finally see the Capitals at 100% health. There's
some comparison in your post, Adam, with the Capitals with some other, call them dominant teams in recent times. 07-08 Detroit, the 2010-2011 Canucks, the Penguins in 12 and 13, and the Chicago Blackhawks also in 12 and 13. How do the Caps stack up against some of these teams in recent times in terms of where they are in the season right now?
It's interesting because you look at a team, in a lot of people's mind, the 07-08 Detroit team is the gold standard in terms of a lot of the analytics community. And they, just like the Capitals, went through a slump at this point of the 07-08 season. They saw a dip in their possession. They saw a dip in their goals. And it's really kind of similar to the Capitals. Granted, the peak for that Red Wings team is a bit higher analytically than this Capitals team, but there's more to it than that, and we've seen this Capitals team come through. And they compare very favorably to that 12-13 Pitt team that made it to the conference finals, losing to Boston. But they're as these dominant teams were, and the whole point of this exercise was to really see if those other dominant teams have struggled at this point of the year, just like some have said the Caps have struggled. So it's not unprecedented what we've seen recently from the Capitals.
Is this more of a, call it human nature kind of thing? You got an 18-point lead and it's Valentine's Day. And do you see that when you look at some of these teams from the recent past that had such dominant stretches? Is it poor puck luck? I know that's something that's mentioned in here where sometimes something that looks like a slump may not actually be one. It may be, hey, just the law of averages over the course of 82 games. What has it been with the Caps over the last few weeks, and what have we seen here recently that maybe would indicate that that's starting to change?
So what we saw here, last year, Chicago supposedly went through a slump, and there were a lot of articles written about it. And recently, someone went back and refuted it by looking at it was just a case of poor puck luck. With the Capitals, a lot of it is human nature, as you say. We see a bit of a dip in shooting percentage, and that is just puck luck. And the possession's been going down a little bit, and I know that very much could just be complacency. If we look at that as historical teams, we see, as I said, that Detroit team and a few other teams also really struggled late in the year. As the Capitals, really, these last few games, they granted the scoreboard wasn't great for the St. Louis tilt, but besides that, they've started to turn the tide and improve on all those little things that we know lead to success down the line.
You have the concept, and I guess it's a big picture thing for any team that is fortunate to be playing past the 9th or 10th of April, the flipping of the switch. The playoffs are here, and when you get to that point and you're Washington and you have had the stretch that you have had over the last, 6 months really, but playing with the lead, we'll say since New Year's, and you move now into postseason play, it feels different. The stuff that maybe you don't get on the graphs and the stat sheet. And for fans and teams alike, it's different than Columbus on a Monday, with all due respect to the Blue Jackets. It's the Flyers. It's Game 1. It's Verizon Center. It's a best of 7. How does a team flip that switch? And is it just a matter of that emotion? And is there statistical data to back that up when you have a team that gets to this point in the season, okay, you know what, it's go time now?
Yeah, we look at a team like the classic example of flipping the switch has to be the Kings of the last few years. Granted, they didn't make the playoffs last year, but they had a poor record early in the year, and then they'd flip the switch second half of the season, and then they'd roll it into the playoffs, and then they'd dominate their opposition. The hope is, and with these regular season dominant teams, again, I'm keep going back to those 07-08 Red Wings, which also ties in nicely because that's Babcock's team. They were able to then turn it around, and despite having that poor stretch with roughly the same amount of games remaining as the Caps have had now, they then turned it back on, got back to peak condition right when the playoffs started, and they went on to beat Pittsburgh in the Stanley Cup final. It's not unquestionable that a team with the skills and really the regular season domination again that the Capitals have displayed this season can go on and win. And that's really what we obviously all hope to see. And as a fan, it's just like the fans. The fans aren't quite as into it right now. Probably even last night was probably a bit different with the President's Trophy winning game, but they're big into it, to the playoffs and the competitive nature, and that's what the players are looking forward to. So as much as they try, as you said earlier, human nature does play into it.
Well, here tomorrow night, Adam, a date with the Philadelphia Flyers that I guess maybe a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago, would have been perhaps just another game because Philadelphia might have been playing out the string. But, boy, that sure isn't the case now, as they are in the 8th spot. Mathematics would say that they are the most likely first-round opponent, although we got a long way to go until we figure that. But this matchup tomorrow with Philadelphia, just your thoughts on if this ends up being a first-round matchup. How do the Caps match up with Philadelphia? Does a more quote-unquote rugged lineup, does a guy like Mike Weber perhaps get more ice time in a series like this just because the Flyers are not as fast-skating a team as others? Just give me your thoughts on what this matchup might mean for Washington if indeed we are back here in postseason play.
I think it'd be an interesting matchup for the Caps. You see a team like Philly, they're as you said, they're not the quickest, but they do have some dynamic speedsters. Even on the back end, Gostisbehere is looking like he really might be a top-tier defenseman, really a potential Norris Trophy winner down the line. And they still have that top-line talent in Giroux. And with Philly being the most likely opponent, I still think you probably want to match up with if Orlov's able to get the turnovers under control. I think he's the guy you'd want to put in personally. But I can understand the argument that you don't want to get pushed around, and not that the Capitals have in the past, but there'd be arguments to be made both ways, but I think I'd stick with Orlov.
Interesting to see the defensive pairs here tomorrow. Barry Trotz not committing to a change, but certainly seemed to walk right up to it in the press conference last night after the Columbus game. Adam, appreciate you joining us here on the show. And again, the name of the article here, and if you haven't had a chance to see it, by all means, we just tweeted it out here as well. Regular season domination and complacency. Adam Stringham joining us here from Japers Rink. Thanks, Adam.
Thanks a lot, John.